It was one of the best-kept secrets in Soviet history. February 1956. Nikita Khrushchev steps up to the podium at the 20th Communist Party Congress in Moscow. No cameras, no recordings, no official transcript, just a tightly controlled audience and a 26,000-word takedown of Joseph Stalin, a sitting Soviet leader publicly dragging his predecessor. That alone was earth-shattering. But what Khrushchev delivered behind closed doors was something else entirely. He accused Stalin, still revered by millions, of mass executions, widespread torture, rampant paranoia, and turning the Communist Party into a machine of terror.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
The Soviet regime wanted the truth buried, but that didn't last long, because despite the USSR's iron grip on information, the speech leaked, not by accident, not through loose lips or clumsy bureaucracy, but thanks to one of the boldest, most intricate espionage missions of the Cold War, Operation Mural. This wasn't just a fluke, this was coordinated, and at the center of it all, a young Israeli intelligence officer, a polished journalist, and a CIA eager to watch the Soviets squirm. Let's break it down. The Soviets had intended the speech to be read, at most, to Communist Party leaders in satellite states, just enough to spark some internal reform, not enough to cause an international meltdown. But in Poland, someone was listening and someone wanted the world to know the truth. Viktor Grawski, a Jewish Polish journalist with access to the speech, made a decision that would change history. Instead of keeping quiet, he chose to share it. And that's where Mossad stepped in. Israel, still a young nation, was rapidly building its intelligence apparatus. Mossad was gaining a reputation, not yet the global powerhouse it would become, but clever, determined, and absolutely fearless. So when they got word that someone had a copy of Khrushchev's bombshell, they didn't hesitate. Enter Yakov Barmer, a young Israeli officer stationed in Europe. His job was to build relationships with Jewish communities in Eastern Europe, places still heavily monitored by Soviet intelligence. But those relationships weren't just about cultural ties. They were about information, leverage, and quiet influence. Barmer's network became the perfect channel. Through these connections, he made contact with Grawski. And what Grawski had wasn't just rumors, it was the real thing, a full, written account of Khrushchev's entire speech. The problem? Getting it out. You couldn't just walk into a Western embassy and drop it off. Poland was crawling with informants. One wrong move, and the Soviets would know someone had leaked the truth. So Mossad did what it does best. It got creative. Using concealed miniature cameras, the agents photographed every single word of the 26,000-word speech. Page by page, line by line. These weren't digital snapshots. This was old-school spycraft, tiny film, hidden compartments, risky handoffs. Everything had to be done in complete secrecy. And the stakes, unthinkably high. If caught, not only would the agents be imprisoned or worse, but it would spark a massive diplomatic crisis between Israel and the Eastern Bloc. Still, they pulled it off. With the speech in hand, Mossad reached out to the CIA. This wasn't just about Israel anymore. It was about blowing a hole through the facade of Soviet moral superiority. The United States had the reach, the media access, and crucially the appetite to expose Stalin's crimes to the world. What followed was a carefully orchestrated release. The speech was leaked in parts, covered in major newspapers, and eventually released in full by the US State Department. And just like that, Khrushchev's carefully managed message exploded out of Moscow's control. The impact, instant and global. Communist parties around the world, especially in Western democracies, were thrown into chaos. Many members had built their identities around the supposed righteousness of the Soviet project. To hear that Stalin had not only betrayed the people but had done so with such violence and paranoia, that shattered illusions overnight. There were resignations, internal revolts, and full-blown ideological crises. Protests broke out. In Hungary, things escalated into the 1956 revolution, a full-scale uprising against Soviet control, violently crushed but deeply symbolic. The USSR scrambled to regain control. Inside the Kremlin, it triggered power struggles and purges. Outside, the regime doubled down on secrecy and censorship, terrified of another leak of this magnitude. And while they never confirmed how the speech got out, they knew someone had cracked the armor. But here's what really makes Operation Mural legendary. It wasn't high-tech surveillance, satellites, or code breaking that made it work. It was people. A journalist brave enough to break ranks, an Israeli officer who built the right relationships, an intelligence agency willing to take the risk, and a CIA ready to turn a moral crisis into a geopolitical weapon.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
The identities of those involved were protected long after the Cold War ended, but once the details emerged in the late 20th century, it became clear. This one mission shifted the global balance of trust. It exposed the dark underbelly of Soviet rule not through military might or propaganda, but by pulling back the curtain and letting the truth speak for itself. And it sent a message loud and clear to authoritarian regimes everywhere. You can't hide your sins forever. Operation Mural also solidified something else. The quiet alliance between Mossad and the CIA. This wasn't just a one-off. It was the beginning of a relationship that would shape intelligence operations for decades. Israel brought unmatched access to Eastern European Jewish communities. The US brought global clout and resources. Together, they changed the game. Even now, in a world obsessed with digital surveillance, satellites, and cyber attacks, the core lesson from Operation Mural still holds. Espionage starts with people, with judgment, with risk, with those who choose truth over comfort. And maybe that's why the leak still hits so hard. Because it didn't just tear down a myth about Stalin, it shattered the illusion that secrets could last forever in a connected world. Khrushchev thought he could control the narrative. He thought he could quietly correct course without paying the price. But the second those pages hit the light, it was over. Stalin's legacy, already stained, was now globally condemned. Communist parties that once worshipped the USSR as a moral compass had to confront the rot at its center. And millions who lived under the shadow of repression finally heard validation. Yes, it happened. Yes, the world knows now. Operation Mural wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. But it was devastatingly effective. So what are we left with? A Cold War spy mission that didn't involve bombs or assassinations but words. Truth. A speech no one was supposed to hear. A network no one was supposed to know existed. And a result no one could ever undo. Stalin ruled through fear. Khrushchev tried to fix it in the dark. But thanks to a handful of people willing to risk everything, the truth found its way out. And decades later, that truth is still echoing. If you found this story wild, dramatic, or just plain fascinating, hit that like button. Drop a comment with your thoughts on Cold War espionage or the power of leaks, because we know you've got opinions. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where history meets chaos, and secrets never stay buried for long. Now here's the thing about secrets, especially the kind wrapped in red tape and sealed with fear: they don't die in the dark. They wait. They simmer. And when the right hands come along, they detonate. That's what Operation Mural did. It was a ticking time bomb Khrushchev didn't even realize he had armed. He thought he could control the narrative. Thought that by keeping it internal, he could air out Stalin's dirty laundry without dragging the entire ideology down with it. But secrecy is a fragile thing. And the moment you decide to tell the truth behind closed doors, you've already lost control of it. Let's be real, Khrushchev wasn't doing this out of pure moral clarity. He needed to distance himself from the absolute horror show of Stalin's rule. Mass arrests, midnight executions, purges that bled the party dry, those were things he needed to hang squarely on the previous regime. It was political survival dressed up as righteous reform. But even with his attempts to manage the fallout, once the speech escaped Soviet walls, it wasn't just Stalin who looked bad. It was the entire system. The myth of the infallible communist utopia cracked wide open. And here's where the Mossad-CIA collaboration really shines. This wasn't just about truth. It was about timing, about power, about knowing exactly when to expose a regime's vulnerabilities. By the time the speech hit Western media, it wasn't just a historical document, it was a geopolitical weapon. Suddenly, you had communist leaders in France, Italy, and elsewhere staring at their newspapers like deer in headlights. Memberships dropped. Protests ignited. The faithful began to question everything they'd ever believed in, because this wasn't capitalist propaganda. This was Khrushchev himself admitting that Stalin turned the Soviet Union into a meat grinder. And while the Soviets tried to pretend nothing had leaked, like a parent insisting their house is clean while the neighbors watch it burn, everyone knew the spell had broken. But let's back up and give credit where it's due, because the kind of operation Mossad pulled off here, that takes steel nerves and surgical precision. Photographing a 26,000-word speech on miniature film in a hostile environment isn't just logistically insane, it's a masterclass in spycraft. Every photo had to be flawless. Every page accounted for. Every second calculated. There were no second chances. No backups. If they were caught, that was it. The discipline required. Next level. One shaky hand, one tail missed, one courier intercepted and it all collapses. And yet, they pulled it off without triggering alarms, without making a splash. The Soviets never saw it coming. And Gravki, the man who handed over the speech, never got paraded on world stages or celebrated in history books. That's how these things go. The people who take the real risks often vanish into the margins. Because in espionage, glory is a liability. Silence is survival. Years later, when the details of Operation Mural finally emerged, it stunned even seasoned intelligence analysts. Not because they doubted Mossad's abilities, but because this one mission achieved what decades of surveillance couldn't. It cracked open the moral shield the USSR used to defend its global standing. Let's talk about that ripple effect. You don't get the Hungarian Revolution in 1956 without this leak. You don't get the splintering of Western communist movements. And you certainly don't get the same kind of Soviet paranoia without this knife to the gut. Khrushchev was already trying to steer the ship away from Stalin's iceberg, but once the leak happened, he didn't just have to navigate internal party politics. He had to do it while the whole world watched, knowing his deepest secrets. Think about the embarrassment. The absolute panic behind closed Kremlin doors. Leaders second-guessing each other. Trust evaporating. Security tightening. Every file suddenly a liability. Every comrade, a potential traitor. It wasn't just about the content of the speech. It was about the vulnerability it exposed. If this could get out, what else was at risk? That's the brilliance of Operation Mural. It wasn't designed to start a war or topple a government overnight. It was a slow burn. A rot from within strategy. Let the truth do the work. Let disillusionment spread. Let people question what they were told to believe. And the kicker? No one saw it coming. No massive manhunt. No dramatic shootouts. Just a quiet, clean, clinical operation that turned into a political earthquake. It also changed the way intelligence agencies thought about collaboration. Mossad and the CIA didn't just share data, they shared strategy. Israel brought cultural access and boots-on-the-ground relationships. The US brought amplification and pressure. Together, they pulled off something neither could have done alone. That model, boots and brains, risk and reach, became a template. A blueprint for future joint operations across continents. Not just for counterterrorism or military intelligence, but for ideological warfare, for narrative control, for psychological impact. Because sometimes, the most powerful weapon isn't a bomb or a bullet. It's a secret, properly timed and strategically leaked. And in the Cold War, where perception was everything, Operation Mural wasn't just a win. It was a masterpiece. Even today, intelligence professionals study it. Not because it was flashy, but because it worked. Because it was human. Because it was real. And yet, the people who made it happen, still barely known. No blockbuster movies. No medals in museums. Just whispers and footnotes. Which is exactly how they wanted it. But we remember. We remember that Gravki said yes when it would have been safer to say nothing. We remember that Barmer built a web of trust strong enough to carry 26,000 words of pure political dynamite. And we remember that Mossad and the CIA had the patience and clarity to play the long game. They didn't just expose Stalin. They rewired the narrative. They showed the world that truth, even smuggled in film canisters, has consequences. And here's what's wild. The operation stayed hidden for decades. No leaks. No scandals. Just quiet success. And when it finally came to light, it wasn't through some massive declassification drama. It just surfaced, piece by piece. That's the mark of a good op. It doesn't need the spotlight to make an impact. When historians finally pieced it together, they realized how deep the implications ran. That one act of exposure contributed to the long, slow crumble of Soviet credibility. Not overnight, not visibly, but in the minds of people who had once believed. So what do we take from all this? That espionage isn't just shadowy figures and encrypted messages. It's people. People who decide to act. People who know the risk and go anyway. People who understand that sometimes, exposing the truth is worth more than any weapon. Operation Mural didn't just reveal Stalin's crimes. It revealed the deep, structural rot behind the image of Soviet power. It showed that no regime, no matter how tightly wound, is immune to its own secrets getting out. It's a reminder that even in a world dominated by digital surveillance, AI-enhanced intel, and satellite mapping, the most devastating truths still often come from whispered conversations and quiet acts of bravery. So, Yeah, when we talk about Cold War turning points, we're not just talking about Berlin or Cuba or Vietnam. We're talking about a few pages of paper, a roll of film, and the courage to act when silence was safer. And that's the real legacy of Operation Mural. There's one last thing that makes Operation Mural stand out, not just in the annals of espionage, but in the brutal, unflinching reality of Cold War politics. It worked, and not just tactically, not just in terms of mission accomplished or intelligence delivered. No, it worked in the emotional, cultural, psychological sense. It did what armies, sanctions, and decades of ideological bickering couldn't do. It pierced the soul of the Soviet myth. Because once the world read those words, once the damning speech was no longer hearsay, but documented truth, the narrative of the infallible, morally righteous Soviet state cracked, permanently. And cracks like that don't get patched. They spread. Even within the USSR, even with censorship and propaganda working overtime, word leaked. The people knew. Whispers in kitchens, rumors in factory lines, sideways glances in party meetings, because deep down, everyone had seen what Stalin was. Khrushchev's secret confession just made it impossible to keep pretending otherwise. And for every disillusioned party member, every student who dropped out of a communist youth group, every defector who looked back and felt justified, Operation Mural was the silent hand that pulled the thread. What's incredible is how few people even knew it was happening in real time. While newspapers ran with headlines about Khrushchev's so-called thaw, only a handful of individuals understood how that speech had actually reached the public. It wasn't some benevolent shift from the top. It was stolen, smuggled, delivered through a gauntlet of risk, code names, and covert meetings. It's almost poetic, right? That a regime built on surveillance and control was undone not by force, but by a few pages of truth. Truth hidden in a jacket pocket. Truth printed in tiny photographs. Truth that hit harder than any weapon. And let's be clear, none of this was accidental. It was precision engineered by people who knew exactly what they were doing. People who believed the world deserved to know. People who didn't need credit or headlines. Just results. That's the cold brilliance of human intelligence. You can build all the satellites and tap every phone line on Earth, but sometimes, it comes down to one decision. One person saying, "I won't stay silent." Thanks so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, you're officially part of the small percentage of people who don't just click away, and that means a lot. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts, your ideas, or even what you'd like to see next. I read every single one of them, and your feedback genuinely shapes the direction of this channel. If you enjoyed the video, tap that like button. It tells YouTube this content is worth sharing. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. We've got more exciting videos coming, and trust me, you'll want to be here for them. This channel is just getting started, and your support helps it grow faster than you realize. Thank you again for spending a part of your day here with me. Stay curious, stay motivated, and as always, take care of yourself. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.